Let's consider this examination question. A delivery company has a total of 160 cars and vans. The number of cars to the number of vans is equal to 3 to 7, which is the ratio, obviously. Each car and each van uses electricity or diesel or petrol. 1/8 of the cars use electricity, 25% of the cars use diesel. The rest of the cars use petrol. Work out the number of cars that use petrol. You must show all working. Whenever I see a question similar to this, I like to extract the necessary information in the form of a summary of all of the text that I can see. So I'll go through that now. And I'm going to highlight this. Total of 160 cars and vans. So I would write that down as shown here, that the cars plus the vans is 160. If we look to here, we can see that it's expressing a ratio, and I would write this down as you can see here. Cars to vans is in the ratio of 3 to 7. There's 1/8 of the cars use electricity, and I would write down this as electric cars is 1/8. 1/8 of what? Well, 1/8 of the number of cars, which we don't know yet, but we'll be calculating the number of cars in a moment. We can carry on and show that 25% of the cars use diesel. So I'm going to write that down as you see here. Diesel cars equals 25%. And then if you look here, it says the number of cars that use petrol. And I will simply write petrol cars equals, and I always put a question mark because that's what I'm trying to find out. I will bring the summarized information to the top of the next slide, and I'll use this to help me make the calculations. I most probably will not refer back to the text now, because this here at the top of this slide shows me all of the info that I need for the calculations. Now, the first thing I need to find out is how many cars there are. Now, the information I've got at the top of the slide does not tell me how many cars we have, but if you look here, I have a ratio of cars to vans, and it goes on to say that this ratio is 3 to 7. So I can write out here that 3 to 7 means 10 parts. Now, the reason I know I've got 10 parts is quite straightforward. You add this 3 to this 7, which obviously gives us the value of 10. I can now use this number here, the 160, and divide it by this 10, and I'll find out what one part is worth. So let's do that calculation here, and you can see I've got 160, which is taken from here, and I'm dividing that by 10, which I took from here where we had 10 parts. And the result, as you can see, is equal to 16. So we can see this ratio is telling us that 3 parts out of 10 are cars. So if I use this 3 to multiply this 16, I'll find out how many cars we have got. So let's do that calculation. And you can see here that number of cars is 3 times 16, which equals 48. The next thing I'm going to calculate is the number of electric cars. Now we can see the number of cars is 48, and here 1/8 of the cars are electric. So I will perform the following calculation. 1/8 of 48, which is the same as saying 1/8 times 48. And of course, if you multiply by a fraction, and there's 1 on top of the fraction, what you can do, you can divide the 48 by the number at the bottom of the fraction, which is 8. So this becomes 48 divided by 8. If you perform that, you can see that the answer is 6. So we have 6 electric cars. The next thing I'm going to do is to find the number of diesel cars. And if you look up here, you can see diesel cars is equal to 25% of all of the cars. So if I take 25% of 48, that's the same as taking a quarter of 48. And to find a quarter of 48, you divide by 4. So I can see that the calculation will look like this. 25% of 48, well, that's the same as 48 divided by 4. And of course, that gives us the result of 12. So we're now in a position to find the number of petrol cars because the calculation has found all of the different component parts of the information I need in order to work out the number of petrol cars. So we can see the number of cars is 48, the number of electric cars is 6, and the number of diesel cars is 12. So to emphasize the point, we can see we need this number 48, we need this number 6, and we need this number 12. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring them down here, as you can see. They're still in bold, but no longer red. I'll remove the bold, and what we're going to do is from the number of petrol cars, I'm going to subtract the number of electric cars, and I'm going to subtract the number of diesel cars. So you will see I will put a minus sign in the appropriate place. And 48 minus 6 is 42. If I now take from that 42 12, I'm going to end up with the result of 30. So the number of petrol cars is 30. So on the dotted line, you would simply write number of petrol cars equals 30, and I've just pointed to it by the red arrow. So you can see in front of you all of the steps that were necessary in order to find out the number of petrol cars. Now the question asks you to show your working. In other words, your workings out. You might not want to put all of the text that I've put here, but what I most certainly would show is this: where you get 10 parts from, how you worked out what one part is, then show 3 times 16 equals 48. Then here you can see that you've took 1/8 of that 48, and here you've then took 25% of 48, and you've used all the numbers you've calculated here to subtract from the 48 the number of electric cars and the number of diesel cars, and you end up with the result of 30. Obviously, if you put the text in, it'll be easier for the examiner to follow your working. So it's up to you. I would put some text in and say what each step actually was and write it out as neat as you can.